Fiat Republic presents Crypto Legends Live Paris.
Thank you everyone for being here. We're really glad to be here in Paris, especially me. I love this city very much. I'm very happy to talk about this topic, and also Adam did a great introduction and how European Union is very advanced in terms of regulation, how are we getting there, and how much privilege we have to be established in Europe during these times. And also we would like to discuss also with Stéphanie here, with Binance experience, how is the US looking like, and maybe someone in the audience also is from the US or has some experience. We would love to hear from you. We will get there. First of all, I would like to introduce our panelists, and I'm sorry for my French pronunciation, but I'll try my best. So, Stéphanie, easy. Guillaume. I'm sorry. And Bruno. So if you guys can please introduce yourselves, that would be lovely. Stéphanie.
Sure, thank you. I'm Stéphanie Cabossioras. I'm the Executive Director of Binance France. So Binance France is the French-registered VASP, Virtual Asset Service Provider. We have been registered. We are the first international platform to be registered in France in May 2022. And I'm currently in charge of all the regulatory matters, so legal, compliance, risk, internal control, internal audit, etc.
Thank you.
So my name is Guillaume, and I'm working as a legal and regulatory consultant at Regsharp, which is a French consulting firm dedicated to the world of fintechs. And basically, we work mainly with many fintech players from different verticals, like DASP entities, electronic money institutions, and payments institutions. And we are dealing with many topics, because we help them to get the license with the French regulators, AMF and ECPR. And we perform some audits, some market studies, and some regulatory training programs to our clients.
Thank you so much, and welcome.
So hello everyone, my name is Bruno Pousset. Thank you very much for inviting me to this talk. So I'm the General Counsel of the Atlendis project. So what's Atlendis? It's a decentralized finance lending protocol. So the protocol has been live since June 2022. And so we basically enable businesses to borrow liquidity on chain. And at the same time, we enable any KYC lenders to provide those liquidity to these businesses. So far, we've enabled around 8 million USD loans. And over the summer, we managed to have a legal entity, a dedicated one, registered as a crypto asset services provider with the IMF. So as a global, with a global view, we enable borrowers to do borrowing on chain, and then we enable them to have a non-on-reform services. So in the end, they basically receive either euro or USD directly on their bank accounts.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm handling legal and all compliance issues in the project.
Yeah, at the end, we're always connecting legal and compliance, right? And it's all about regulations and how we should comply with them. Well, so this panel is mainly to discuss how Europe is in the forefront of regulatory developments, and how we can also be the example and lead the US and maybe other jurisdictions, such as South America, for instance, to get there and to develop and be every time more and more innovative, but at the same time protecting the consumers, because that's the main goal overall. So I'd like to start with you, Stéphanie. I don't know if you guys all know, but Stéphanie worked for the Autorité des Marchés Financiers, the AMF, for 5 years before you work for Binance. So you have a lot of information from the inside as well. So we know that France has been always innovative, and there are a lot of different innovations and projects, such as, for instance, the UNICOR, the Universal Node to ICO Research and Network Program in 2017. And basically this program was supporting blockchain projects and raising funds using ICOs and conducting research and so on. So this mainly shows how France and in the end Europe as well differentiate from the US in terms of like innovation and how do we want to get there in terms of regulation. So in your opinion, what were the precipitating, let's say, factors that France being ahead of the curve for the regulations, and how do you think that this will be like similar to the EU attitude?
Yeah, alors, the real push came from the market. So why France paved the way? It's because in France, a lot of crypto projects emerge, and they went to see the regulators to check how they should be regulated, if they were regulated. And at that time, so it was 2017, 2018, it was not regulated. So the answer was, you have no regulation to apply. And this was a problem for these players because they wanted to differentiate themselves from scams. At this time, it was the time of ICOs, and there was a lot of scams among the projects. So the AMF at that time, so the regulator, issued a public consultation asking the industry, do you want to continue being not regulated? Do you want self-regulation, or do you want a proper regulation in the law? And at that time, a majority of answers were in favor of a proper regulation. So that's how the adventure started, the regulatory adventure started in France.
That was
very
back
soon,
in 2017.
2018, the public consultation. So very soon, all the French public authorities came out to draft a regulatory framework, and this was endorsed by the government. So the Ministry of the Economy, Bruno Le Maire, who is still the minister. And what was the difference, I think, for France between other countries is that the potential, the strategy about blockchain, the potential of blockchain was clearly understood by politicians in a very early stage. So the productivity gains, the impact on the financial sector, all the game-changing technology really was understood by the public authorities. So with this public support, the regulatory framework was enacted in the PACT law, so in 2019, and it fully applied to the VASPs in 2020. And so it was a two-level approach, because at that time the problem is that we want to have a regulatory framework, but France was the only one in the world almost, was among the first ones to issue such a framework. So it was not wanted to prevent the actors to be able to develop. So that's why it was a double approach was thought. First one is this mandatory registration for AML purposes, because it was for EU legislation requirements. It was the 5th directive on AML. So this was mandatory. And then the second level was optional. So it was the optional VASP license only for players who wanted to comply to higher standards and to show like this label of a public authority. Fortunately, it worked, surprisingly, not because a lot of people applied for the VASP optional license, because as you may know, so we have now in France around 100 registered VASP and only one licensed VASP, and it is a bank. So it didn't work for that. But it worked for two things. First, because when the EU authorities wanted to legislate on crypto, they saw what framework were on the market, and there was only the French one, so they copy-pasted the French regulation. And second, because it gave time to French actors to be able to develop. So that's why now in France we have 100 VASP. They had the time to develop, to have their business grow, and now we have a lot of players. And now, so the next challenge is the European regulation, which will come into force in 2025 for the CASPs, and then the whole package will become mandatory, but at least for the whole Europe, so there will be a level playing field between French players and EU players.
Fair enough. I think you already kind of answered my second question. Is like how these early projects help developing the regulations we have right now. You just said like the MICA kind of like copy paste what the French regulators have put in place. But do you think France like was really involved in the negotiations and were like giving maybe in the front of these discussions?
Sure. I think the really the strength of the French regulatory framework is that the initial national legislation was built with the players. It was a cooperation between public authorities and the industry in various places. So the ADAN, it was the beginning of ADAN, the professional association, and in other places and with direct contact between the regulator and the players. So at the beginning, the framework was okay. It was not something imposed by the regulator that would not fit the needs of the industry. And then the public authorities, but everybody knows that, were heavily involved in the negotiation in Brussels. But like in any text, the French authorities are very present in any text, and this one was clearly a priority for them.
But I think you also mentioned is really interesting that the French players were like more prepared and are more prepared because they had more time to study the regulations, understand what are the requirements, and get prepared internally as well in their frameworks. So that's really nice. Thanks. Moving a little bit from the topic of AMF and the regulations more to the AMF approach to DeFi. So AMF recently, if you don't know, has published like a tentative thoughts on DeFi regulations. And I think we all know that DeFi is a very delicate topic when it comes to TradFi and CeFi and DeFi. So for instance, recently we had MICA published, and there were a lot of like parts of MICA that was like basically erased to take off the DeFi parts and make sure that there would be not a lot of conflicts around that. So I would like to ask you, Bruno, basically, considering your DeFi experience in France, could you perhaps like show us this tentative AML thoughts on DeFi and basically, especially from the perspective of balancing regulation with innovation, given the nature of DeFi per se?
Thanks for the question. Maybe just taking a step back on MICA as an introductory point. I think so. In MICA's provision, there's something that says that basically, if a crypto services is done through in a decentralized manner without any intermediary, then this service shouldn't fall into MICA's scope. And I mean, we're all kind of happy about that, and we all said that MICA is not handling any like DeFi. So I think we have to be careful about this in the way that this like DeFi is a complex environment, and what's really DeFi is something hard to define. And yeah, I think like when going through the application text of MICA, we have to be like just careful about to make sure that what we wanted not to fall into MICA scope is actually not falling into this scope. So this was just like I think there's quite a lot of DeFi projects that might be just decentralized in name only, and so I think this project should like think in the way they are operating, because even though they like market themselves as DeFi, they might in the end fall into MICA scope. So yeah, just
note to everyone. Define your product.
That's just my 2 cents. I mean, happy to discuss about it, but yeah, I think just saying MICA exclude DeFi from its scope may be a shortcut for some projects. And so coming back to the IMF approach about DeFi, I think the IMF hasn't rushed to try to regulate DeFi, and I think it's a really good thing. Stephanie talked about cooperation with the players at the time of the Pact Law back in 2019. I think we are seeing quite the same movement. So there has been quite a lot of discussion channels with the IMF, but also the so for those who are not familiar with this, the IMF in France is like the capital markets authority, while the ACPR is more the banking authority. So both of them actually have a lot of discussions with the DeFi players, and they both issued discussion papers, reports about what's DeFi and how it works. And so I think it's a really good thing that our regulators are trying to understand what it is and to be able then to answer the question of should it be regulated or not and how it should be regulated.
Perhaps AMF will be again the innovative regulator there.
Well, I mean, perfect transition. I think so. I think afterwards, everyone agrees that the crypto asset service provider law in France was a really great thing. So we've seen like a lot of international players coming in France, and I'm like, as a French citizen, I'm really proud of that. I'm really happy about it. I don't know if like we should do the same with DeFi. I think it's always easy afterwards to say that it was a good decision. I think it was it's not an easy one, and so I think like having regulators being more and more aware of what's DeFi is a good thing, and also like I think now the French regulators knows quite a lot of projects and knows who they can talk to if they have like this like kind of specific questions, and so I think this is really important. And also I think we should have in mind that so as part of MICA, the European Commission will have to issue reports, and one interim report is actually due for the end of June 2025. And in this report, so the European Commission will have to position itself about whether or not decentralized crypto asset services should be regulated. And I think all these discussion papers and materials that are produced by our French regulators will definitely help this European legislation to come. And so yeah, I think things are going in the right way. DeFi is definitely a complex topic, and I think everyone is getting prepared to have it regulated if needed.
And it's actually a bit contradictory as well, right? Like we think about DeFi and we think about regulations. I'm very curious on how the regulators will have the approach to regulate DeFi, and also from the market perspective, how would be the reaction on the regulations, right? As well, in this sense. So Guillaume, any comments, any ideas on this topic as well?
Well, I agree with what has just been said by Bruno. I just want to add some elements on this specific point. Because as Bruno mentioned, we will have to wait 2025 before we see the European Commission report to be published. Which means that we will have to wait several more years before we see a specific EU regulation regarding the DeFi industry. So probably 2026 or 2027. So in other words, it's like an eternity for the DeFi sector. So I think that a lot of innovation and new kinds of typologies of risks will probably appear on the market by then. So without being addressed by the European Commission report. We can take the bet if you want.
Yeah, too little, too late.
Yes. So I think the good approach for the regulators would be to innovate in their approach to regulate this new industry. I mean, to take a new way of thinking in order to set up an appropriate and a proportionate regulatory framework for the DeFi industry. Because as I think everyone knows in this room, DeFi has nothing to do with traditional finance. It is built on something totally different. Because traditional finance is built on centralization with intermediation. And that's why we have a lot of regulated financial intermediaries in the market, like trading platforms, settlement systems, clearinghouse, just to name a few. Whereas the DeFi sector, by definition, there is not any intermediary between the user and the infrastructure. So I think that this duality of business model or this duality of architecture or infrastructure implies to set up a different regulation for the DeFi activity. And I think that the best way to do that for the regulators is to first correctly identify the key risks, technological risks identified related to the DeFi activity, because a lot of money laundering risks associated with traditional finance do not necessarily apply to the DeFi sector, and vice versa.
And that's the first challenge already, right? Because regulators need to understand the technology first and then be able to regulate.
Of course, and in order to mitigate such new risks, so in the DeFi sector we have like the cross-chain bridge. So it's like a technical gateway between different blockchains in order to create some interoperability between each blockchains. So obviously we can see it as a big commercial opportunity, but at the same time, from what we can observe and from our experience, it can also be associated with new typologies of risks, like chain hopping, for instance. But as you have mentioned, we have some technological market tools on the market, and I'm thinking of the blockchain analytical tools, like, I don't know if I can say the name of so, chain analysis, Atlendis Labs, Score Chain, just to name a few, Elliptic also. And such tools help to mitigate crypto risks because they help to monitor the crypto flows. Some of them also cover some the specific DeFi risks, like cross-chain bridge. But most importantly, they can also help to detect some new patterns of fraud and new typologies of money laundering, not even identified by the regulators themselves, So that's why I think typically such tools will represent the future of DeFi regulation, in the sense of that they are experts in their domain on a day-to-day basis, right? And I think that we need a strong cooperation between regulators and tech players, market players, and even legislator, because at the end, legislator makes the law.
Because now you're complicated even more for the regulators, like, because then you say DeFi and then AI, because those tools are all about AI. So you're just maybe scaring them in the beginning, like, with all this information.
Yes, but I think that, there's still a big challenge regarding such tools, because I think that regulators must properly define and understand how such tool works, in order to correctly control them, to perform some audits, and even to get some better reporting from the DeFi entities, So the quality of data is fundamental in this industry. So that's why I said we need a big cooperation between authorities and market players, because everyone must speak the same language, And in the same logic, I think that regulators and basically legislators needs to properly define the keywords and the key concepts of DeFi. Otherwise, such a regulation could hinder innovation. And it's not an easy task actually to balance both innovation and regulation. So in the same logic, it would be unfortunate to apply like the old-fashioned contract law, for instance, to a smart contract. Because by definition, and even technically speaking, a smart contract could not be qualified as a legal contract, according to the legal contract law, in the sense of a legal agreement between two parties to produce some legal effects, So that's why they need to properly define the keywords, and in the same logic, and I will finish here because it's a really interesting topic. I think that one of the most important challenge, not to say the most important one, is to determine who will be responsible in case of a damage caused by a DAO, for instance, decentralized autonomous organization, from a legal perspective, So, because as by definition, there is not any intermediary, so who will be responsible? The holder of tokens, the designer of the smart contract. Can we consider a shared responsibility between the different parties? So, the debate is open. even though we can notice, I think it was last year or a few months ago, in the US, an American judge qualified a DAO as an incorporated association. I think it was in Uki against a CFTC case. So, and I will conclude here, promise. To set up a proportionate DeFi regulatory framework adapted to the business needs, as I said, we need a strong cooperation between authorities and market players. Otherwise, the big risk would be, as I said, it can impact the decentralized nature of some DeFi projects.
Or even sometimes DeFi projects not even complying with the law because it's basically not applicable, right? Yeah. Thank you so much for the insights, very useful. Great, so I would like to move forward from the DeFi to MICA, which is a really important topic, and then basically our last round of questions here. So I will continue with you, if that's okay. So with your, because you're a regulatory expert in France and let's say in Europe as well, can you just give us some insights on how MICA helped CASPs to basically thrive, and if they thrive, and how can this impact, for instance, CASPs that are operating in the US?
Well, a big question. I think in order to understand the real issues behind such question, it's important to recall the main objectives of MICA regulation first, because the first objective of MICA is to protect the consumer, specifically after the recent crypto scandals affecting the world of crypto, like FTX, Silvergate, or Silicon Valley Bank. And by the way, all of them have one common point, because they involve American entities only. The second objective of MICA is to create an harmonization, of course, across the EU territory. So to avoid what the lawyers says the regulatory arbitrage. Since with MICA, CASP entities are now required to get only one single license in order to operate their activity through the EU territory. So without the need to get 26 or 27 different licenses in each country they want to operate. So I think it will boost competition in the market, and I hope, or we can hope, that it will avoid any divergence between the local authorities, as it is a regulation and not a directive, And I think the most important objective of MICA is that MICA will facilitate compliance, actually, because CASP entities will now have a clear set of rules, a clear rule book, regarding the legal definitions, regarding the type of services they can provide on the market, regarding the requirements to get a license, like on-fund requirements, or even the informations to be delivered to the consumer, or in case of an ICO, for instance. So, and I would say there is also another objective, but it is more like a political objective than a purely regulatory objective, because I think that MICA will help Europe to take the lead, actually, to regulate crypto assets, and why not influence other parts of the world, And having said that, if we look at what's going on outside, on the other side of the Atlantic, I think that the contrast is really striking, right? Because I said that in Europe we will have a clear rule book, whereas at the same time in the US we still have a regulatory vagueness, because there is not a single crypto regulation. And there's been a long debate in the US regarding the legal qualification of a crypto asset. Is it a security or a commodity? And it's because of a decision by the US Supreme Court of Justice from the last century, actually. I think it was during the 40s, where the American judge established the OVE test. which helps the judge to qualify if an asset can fall under the definition of a security, or technically speaking, an investment contract under the American securities law. Which means that currently, under the American law, if a crypto asset is not qualified as a security, and then not falling within the scope of the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, it cannot be, but it may be potentially be qualified as a commodity, and then falling under the supervision of the CFTC, so another agency. So just realize, we are in 2023, and the American regulators are still not able to properly define what a crypto asset is. Just remember, just realize, because in France, at least, I would say, we've had a legal definition of a crypto asset, as said by Stéphanie, with La Loi Pacte. So I think we are...
No bias.
Sorry? So I think we are a little bit ahead from the American, And it's also interesting to note that a lot of American crypto American entities are considering to leave the American country, the territory, and to establish themselves in Europe. Like Coinbase a few months ago threatened the SEC to leave the country. And we have also a lot of American entrepreneurs who are calling for a regulation, a specific crypto regulation adapted to the business needs. So basically, they are asking for compliance, So I think MICA will facilitate or enable compliance. And, at Regsharp, we believe that thanks to MICA, the road or the path to compliance is made easier, because now CASP entities will better navigate across the rules. And it will facilitate our job, basically, because we can advise them better regarding what is allowed or what is forbidden, for instance. And I will conclude. Again, sorry, it's a really interesting topic. Just final words. I think that this topic shows the different approach between the US and the EU. And I would say it's like an historical approach because, the European law, or at least the European continental law, because I'm excluding the UK, but they excluded themselves, actually. Actually.
No bias.
Actually. And,
Cheers, James.
I'm so sorry, but it's... so everyone has its own belief. But I think, historically, the European continental law is built on Roman law, So a written set of rules, like a codified text, By contrast, the Anglo-Saxon world is built upon common law, So it relies mainly on court decisions. So from a certain point of view, we can consider that the American judge makes the law, It's like a case-by-case assessment. So while, the Europe is step-by-step building the blocks towards a general regulatory framework, I would say that the US sandbox-like system is still driven by sanctions, So I think MICA will be a big asset for Europe, but also for CASP entities, but not only European entities, but also international players, because, at Regsharp, we are discussing with a lot of international players from the crypto industry, and all of them, better to say 90% of them, consider Europe, and specifically France, as a big market opportunity in the next few years to launch their regulated services.
That's super nice. Thanks for the insights, by the way. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. We would love to continue, especially for legal and compliance. Discussion is always very interesting. But I would like to give also the audience, if you have any questions for our panelists.
It was fascinating to listen, like a lot of pride of European legal system, European definitions, European regulatory frameworks. I'm actually quite proud. As I said, I'm Polish as well. We're maybe not as advanced as France, no bias, but we're kind of, I guess we, as in the Polish society, is following what the EU is I guess working through. So my question is, we made comparisons to the US, but US still is not the number one consumer market in crypto. So how do you, like the comments that you made around innovation here, right? The chance for Europe, the opportunity that we have right now. How do you contrast that with where the money's at the moment?
I can take that one. It's precisely because the market is not here that the EU needs to do extra efforts to take the market here. So we are clearly not in the same situation in the US and in Europe and in Asia. In the US, naturally, innovation goes there because there are several reasons, attractiveness, universities, etc. And the US manage in some way to drain all the brains, the world brains, at home. So that's why we need in Europe to make extra efforts. The strategy behind is to say, okay, we have tested the internet revolution. Bon, we need to say that we have lost somehow. But it's not the end of the war. So now we know that blockchain will be very disruptive in this new wave to the financial sector. Mainly, it's the first application of blockchain. We know that in the middle term, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, there will be a massive disruptive effect because of the change of technologies and centralized ledgers. So the idea is to say, let's take this opportunity to have the major players in Europe and especially in France. That was the philosophy behind this. But how do you do to attract all these players? Because they are not here at the beginning. So the approach taken is to say we will drive them from the regulation, because at that time, a few years ago, there was no clarity on the regulatory framework. And the decision point when a big international player like Binance, for example, decides to locate its activity in a state, it's because of the clarity of the regulation, not because of tax, not because of social, employment law, etc., not because subsidiaries, public subsidiaries, because in crypto, the clarity of the framework is absolutely key. And so that's why so far I think the French strategy has worked, because on paper, the framework is clear. For crypto, now for stable coins, for traditional markets, there is the DLT pilot regime, or it's another topic, but on paper, it has worked. First stage. Second stage, we need to attract the big international players. If you want to be to rank among the first one in the world, you need to have them. And fortunately, so Binance was the first to declare its intention to localize its activities in Europe, in France, and to make France the European hub. And following that, a significant number of international players, Crypto.com, Circle, OKX, etc., made the same move. Now, for me, we are at the third stage. The third stage is that we need to demonstrate that France is really able to develop business. So the objective is to show that all of this is not just paper, but we are able to really bring added value, money, business in France. So this, I think, this demonstration needs to be done in the next 6-8 months before the entry into application of MICA, because the opportunity lies there. Why? Because currently, France is the only member state in the EU where you can apply now for a MICA license, because the French VASP optional license is the same. And when you get the French optional license, you have like a MICA license, and you can be the first one to passport all around Europe. So you can take the whole European market the first. To be able, so normally on the paper, every player in the EU and even international player should come into France. How will it succeed if the French authorities manage to give the license, and to give this license in a way that is secure for the consumers, so having done all the checks and to make sure that the compliance is really at a high standard in all these VASP, but it's the prerequisite for these businesses to grow. So that's why with the add-on, we have asked recently to the government to give additional resources to the AMF and to the regulators, to have staff, to review all these applications, to ask all the questions, etc., and to be able to deliver all this flow of new applications, either for French players or European users. So my hope is that this strategy will win. Let's see.
Thank you so much.
Maybe can I?
Of course.
Yeah, just a few words. But I think in this strategy for Europe to succeed in being a strong player in the world in crypto, I think also one of the missing piece now is to have like a reliable euro stablecoin. I think like all stablecoin almost are denominated in USD, and so yeah. You talked earlier to have local solutions. I think like if we want our businesses or people to be able to have more use cases of crypto and Web3 solutions, I think it needs to go through also a strong euro stablecoin. So.
Well, thank you so much. It was really insightful. Thank you so much, the three of you.
Thank
and
you.
Over to Sophie.